Barbecue in Australia is booming, and I'm not just talking about burning a couple of snags on a gas grill either. We're talking wood-fired, bark-crusted, smoked meats. I'm Jess Pryles from Burger Mary and the Australasian Barbecue Alliance. Welcome to the world of low and slow. This handsome fellow, this is a forequarter of a cow. So this is the front end of the cow. You can see his front leg here. That's the neck. His head would have been up here, but he's got more important and delicious things to become. So your brisket. Brisket is actually the breast of the cow. So that means it's going to sit in here, just behind this leg, tucked away in there. So that right there, that's where barbecue gold lives. All right, here is our brisket. It's just come off the forequarter. This is actually a Ranges Valley grass-fed brisket. What you can see here is it's got a really pronounced grain. It's a very tough cut. It does really well with low and slow cooking. It can stand up to a lot of smoke. Lots of collagen in here to break down during the cook. So this is what we call a point end brisket in Australia. It's had the navel end cut off. In the States, they would call this a packer cut brisket. That means that it's got the flat muscle, which runs the whole way across, and up on this end where you can see it get higher, it's also got the point end muscle. This is kind of what makes brisket so tough to cook, because you have to cook a piece of meat that's only this thick at one end and nearly double the thickness at the other end, and you have to make sure that you cook both ends to perfection at the same time. It's a little challenging. The other thing you want to make sure that you do when you cut it is cut against the grain, and that'll just give you a much more tender bite than a long stringy piece as well.
Brisket is a very popular cut because it has several different elements. So there's a lean, there's a fatty part, it slices well, presents well, and it is a very, very tasty cut of meat. However, it does take a long time to cook, and it is a very difficult thing to cook.
Brisket's difficult to cook because it's a labour of love. It takes time, it takes you sitting in front of the smoker for hours on end, and it can be easily overcooked or undercooked. So yeah, there's a lot of love that comes from cooking brisket.
I think a lot of people get hooked up in the hype that they read a lot and on forums and that we're injecting to keep moisture in a brisket. Don't. For the first couple of times, learn to cook it as it is. Learn to taste the flavour of the brisket for what it is, and then down the track, yes, if you want to inject it to try and get more flavour or anything, do that then, but learn that cut of meat first and taste it for what it is. Don't try and start a benchmark here when you haven't got one. Yeah.
Brisket's so popular because it's the best meat. It is the ultimate. It's the only one that matters. If a brisket's done right, you'll get a nice candy flavour and it'll just melt, and you get the most amazing party in your mouth. I leave about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch of fat on my brisket when I trim.
Grass-fed all the way. It's just so much more succulent and juicy. Grain-fed, go to a feedlot if you want grain-fed.
There's some kind of staples to, taking it to the 160. You can boil it, then finish it off, to around 200 degrees or kind of some benchmarks. But I recommend that people don't just follow those textbook temperatures, but they actually are feeling the meat. They're learning from it every time they do it, and they're becoming a better barbecuer every time and learning something versus just following some instructions, and that's what it's all about.
Fat and brisket, in my opinion, really go hand in hand. You cannot have good brisket unless you've got a nice fatty piece of brisket to start with. So marbling and that extra bit of sort of fat that you leave on the brisket is so important in terms of the end product, the juiciness of it, the flavour of it. There's a lot of people out there are a little bit sort of fat phobic, but there's good fats and there's bad fats, and trust me, when you see a nice layer of fat through your brisket or whatever, you know you're going to have an amazing experience.
Brisket's probably the hardest thing to cook because it's probably one of the biggest meat you're going to be cooking. It requires a lot of time, effort. You don't want to dry it out. You've got two pieces, the flat and the point, so you got to watch both of those sort of separately. It's one that I've had to learn in recent years because of these competitions, because being from Tennessee, it's not very common. So, but yeah, it's just very big, so that's what probably makes it more difficult, and the time variation to cook it.
With brisket, we definitely cook grain-fed because we find that there's a higher fat content, and we find that that is going to help with your product, because at the end of the day, it's going to be juicier and it's going to be fattier.
Doesn't matter whether you choose grain or grass, the trick is to just give it a go. So go to your butcher, grab a brisket, fire up the smoker and give it a crack. You can also visit us on the web at ozbbq.com.au and join our Facebook group to chat to other people who are into low and slow cooking.